Hey guys, Aussie Firebug here with another article for people in Australia trying to reach financial independence. My latest article is entitled Rentvesting, and I think it's a really, really cool concept. The word itself doesn't really sit well with me for some reason. I just think it's a disgusting mashup of words, but the concept is really cool, and I think a lot of young people, especially if you're living in Sydney or Melbourne, could benefit potentially from this tactic. So yeah, I'm just going to get into it. Rent vesting. First of all, what is rent vesting? You might be able to figure out a little bit about rent vesting just from the name. It's probably going to have something to do with renting, probably going to have something to do with investing. And that is 100% true. I describe rent vesting, the easiest way I put it is rent where you want to live while you invest where it makes sense. So basically, if you want to live in the two major cities in Australia, Sydney and Melbourne, to buy real estate in those two cities, you would have to have such an enormous amount of money at the moment that a heap of people are finding that it's unaffordable and they can't buy in these two cities. Now, I didn't hear about rent vesting. I only heard about it probably last year, and I'm sure it's been around a lot longer, but I think it's now becoming a lot more popular just because of the climate that we're currently in. We're currently in a climate where a heap of first home buyers can't enter, they can't get their foot into the property market in the two major cities, Sydney and Melbourne. So some people are turning to rent vesting to help that situation out. So I've described it, rent where you want to live and invest where it makes sense. Let's just consider for a moment the old school way, how it used to be to buy a house, for your mum and dad, how, the stock standard formula they used to use to buy a house. It would be, go to school, get a good job, save enough money for a deposit, buy a house, pay it off, live happily ever after. But because of the climate in the two major cities at the moment, a heap of people, majority of people, can't do that. The house prices are rising faster than they can save for that deposit. Or they've got the deposit, but the loan amount would be so massive that they don't feel comfortable taking on that mortgage and then having that mortgage for 25, 30 years. So that's unless you've got really wealthy parents or you've inherited a whole bunch of money, that stock standard formula isn't going to work for a normal person with a normal paying job these days. So, and in my article as well, I don't know if anyone got this reference, the smashed avocados reference. I wrote a little joke. The new formula is get arts degree, smash skipped avocado for 6,363 days, pay your deposit, pay off your loan, enter death blissfully, knowing your financial situation will not follow you to the afterlife. Now, the smashed avocados, I hope at least someone got it. You would have seen, or hopefully you would have read the Australian, some guy wrote, I think he was a baby boomer, he wrote this article about millennials spending too much money on breakfast and how they're spending $22 on smashed avocado on bread, and they should be saving more money for a house, which I sort of agree with, but I just thought it was pretty funny article. And then a whole bunch of people on the internet got really angry, a whole bunch of millennials. And SBS wrote an article about I stopped eating smashed avocados and now I own a castle, which I thought was pretty funny. So I'll link to it in the article. So back to my original point. So you have that situation where you can't get your foot in the property market. You don't want to, but your money's sort of sitting in the bank. It's earning paltry interest. The savings accounts are like 3.5% or something. Super low. You're sort of frustrated. You're sitting on the sidelines. You can't get your foot in the door. What are you going to do? So rent vesting, what a few people have started doing is they're renting where they want to live, so they don't want to give up the fact that they live in a world-class city, which Melbourne and Sydney are definitely world-class cities. They're one of the best two cities in the entire world. So they love living in those cities. So they keep renting in those cities, but they use the money that they've got, their savings that they've got that isn't quite enough maybe for Melbourne or Sydney, or they just don't want to, maybe it is enough, but they don't want to take on this massive mortgage. They use those funds, and if you want to get into the real estate market, they invest where it makes sense. They invest elsewhere, which might be interstate. You know, it might not be Melbourne or Sydney because that's too expensive. It might be Queensland. It might be Tasmania. I don't know. Somewhere else where it makes more sense to do so. Let's just take Queensland, for example. I know the medium house price in Queensland is a lot lower, and the rental yields are a lot higher. So that makes more sense if I was investing to invest in somewhere like that rather than Melbourne or Sydney, who it potentially is in a bubble. You know, the houses might, the prices might pop. All these things are going on. Maybe you don't want to buy a house in there, because think about it. When you buy a house, that's your biggest asset. For 99% of people, buying the house is going to be their biggest asset for their entire lives. And it's really funny. Heaps of people, I always hear, they're like, oh, you know, we bought here, like we paid an extra $100,000, but you know, we're going to rent it out in 10 years or so, and you know, it's going to make us all this money, or like it's going to turn into an investment. That's not the way you should be thinking about investing. 99 times out of 100, where you want to live, where it's desirable for you to live, is not the best place to invest. So when you buy a house, that's pretty much your biggest investment, unless you actually have other investments and you're diversified. For the majority of people, their family home is going to be their biggest asset they ever own in their lives. So it sort of bugs me a bit when people are like, oh yeah, we bought here, just because it's going to make a better investment. It's like, no, you bought there because you wanted to live there, and you're justifying spending the extra money because you think it's going to be a better investment. But I promise you, if I ask them, you know, anything to do with the market there, the potential, like the infrastructures coming up, the population growth, anything like that, they wouldn't have researched. It's purely an emotional decision, and you shouldn't be making emotional decisions when you're investing. So I had a little story in my article about this guy named Harry from Melbourne. You know, he wants to get into the housing market, but he's got a deposit, but it's not quite enough, and the market is rising faster than he can save. And he's been saving for years now, and you know, he's seen the last decade, year after year, his friends, his family have bought houses, bought real estate, and they keep getting wealthier and wealthier. And here he is sitting on the sidelines waiting for something to happen. He's trying to save his ass off. He can't save faster than the market can rise. And he doesn't know what to do. He's banging his head against the wall, like thinking, what can I do? I don't want to... technically, he can take out a loan with a bank. They will give it to him at like 95% LVR. But he doesn't want to have a loan that big and then stress out for 25, 30 years about, you know, what happens if I lose my job? How am I going to afford the mortgage? Blah, blah, blah. So he's at a crossroads. He comes across Rentvesting, and he's like, how can this help me? So he decides to keep living in Melbourne because he loves living in Melbourne. All his family and friends there, he loves it. But he's going to get into the housing market in another state. He's going to invest maybe in Queensland, like I said. So he gets into the housing market. He uses his deposit that wasn't quite enough in Melbourne. He buys an investment property in Queensland, which the yield is a lot better. Let's say he buys under market value, and the rent coming in covers all his expenses. So he doesn't have to pay anything to hold on to that asset. That asset is looking after itself. He has to do a few, you know, paperwork a couple times a year, whatever, to keep it running. But he's not losing money. He's not negative gearing like a dummy every year to hold that asset. So now continues renting at a lower price. By the way, I wrote an article, and it's in this Rentvesting article. It's linked in there, Rent versus Buy, and you read that article just to familiarize yourself with all the extras that come with buying a house. 90% of the time, renting is cheaper than buying. And if you live in Melbourne and Sydney, that becomes 110% of the time. There's no way that you'll buy a house in Melbourne and have it work out cheaper than if you had rented. Okay, so read that article if you're interested. So back to Harry. So he buys in Queensland and he holds on to it, and it doesn't cost him any money to hold on to. He puts his deposit on it, and then he continues living his life for a few more years. And all the capital gains that are happening in the housing market, he's now a part of. He is not outside the market now. He's in the market. So anything that happens, and that also includes losses potentially. So anything that if there's another housing boom or something like that, he can benefit from that now. He's not continuously just staying out of the market and saving and potentially have it keep going up and him not benefiting from it. He's in the market now. Maybe 5, 7, 10 years go by and he is ready to buy a house, because there's a lot of intangibles that come from buying a house. Like, it's not all about the money. There's a lot of your castle. You got to raise a family in it. You want that security. There's things that you can't put a dollar on, and I understand that. So circumstances change. So let's say that Harry, after 10 years, wants to buy a house. He can sell his investment property, and then he gets all his deposit completely back, and any capital gains that he made that whole time, he can now use that for a deposit in Melbourne. So that's an example of how someone can use rentvesting to live where they want to live at a much cheaper rate by renting and investing where it's smarter to invest. A few pros and cons. So I'm going to go over the pros of rentvesting. So no mortgage stress. If you think about the example I used with Harry, he's renting in Melbourne, so he doesn't own a mortgage. He might be locked into a year's contract, if that. His mortgage that he has, so he has a mortgage, but the key difference with rentvesting as opposed to buying is he's not paying for the mortgage. He has tenants that are paying the mortgage off for him. So if the person that's paying off the mortgage for him gets sick, they lose their job, or they've got to move, or something happens to them, guess what? New tenants come into his house, and then they start paying the mortgage off for him. If he gets sick, let's say something happens to Harry, he comes down with an illness, he's got to look after his sick mum, like back home, whatever. He is not locked into a mortgage now. He's renting. So he's super flexible. He can pick up his stuff. He loses his job, he can move from where he's renting into maybe a cheaper place, or he can move back home, whatever. He's got all his options are open. If he gets a raise, he's earning more money. He can move into a more expensive place to rent. He can live a bit more luxurious for a bit. The flexibility is a massive part of the rentvesting lifestyle. So he hasn't got mortgage stress, because the mortgage that he does own is being paid for, and he's got that flexibility to adjust to the situation as it occurs. If you take on that huge mortgage, you better hope that you're in a job and you're earning good money for 25 years so you can pay it off, because as soon as you're not, what are you going to do? You might be able to move out and rent it, but as I talked about before, maybe the place that you bought wasn't the best investment, and maybe it's not that desirable street. You're not going to get that much rent for it. The rental yield is horrible, which it probably is if you're buying in a city, in a Melbourne or Sydney at the moment. So things like that. Exposure to the property market sooner. I just went over an example. Start building your wealth now, not later, so you can start your investment portfolio. Like everything that I've said, has sort of been towards the property market, but it doesn't have to be property. It can be stocks, bonds, ETFs. It can be anything. When you rent, you've got so much more free cash flow up your sleeve. So where you put that is up to you, but you can start investing a lot sooner in life. And I am of the strong belief that if you invest before you own a home, you're going to benefit from it purely from compounding interest. So if you know what compounding interest is, that's good. If you don't, Google it. But that's my thoughts. If you plant the seed earlier in life, it's going to pay huge dividends your whole entire life, rather than if you spend the first 20 years paying off your family home and then you start investing for retirement. You missed out on 20 years of capital growth, of compounding interest. Yeah, you're not going to have your family home paid in the first 20 years, but so what? Like it's all relative. Like maybe you do want a home because you got kids, that's up to you. But for me, I'm more worried about starting that investment portfolio and growing it than I am worried about the security I don't have with renting. I pretty much went over all the pros, but it has some cons. So, this isn't perfect, and it's definitely not for everyone. So, first con I've got here is you won't be paying off your home to live in. And I think there's a psychological connection with paying off something that's yours. You have a home, it's yours, now you're paying it off. Renting can feel like dead money. And it can. I rent, and it can sometimes feel at the end of the month, you got to pay all that money, and you're like, damn, that's, so much money going out of my account that I'm not going to get anything for. But you technically are, you're having somewhere to live, and the interest repayments on a huge loan is the same. So anyone that says to you that rent money is dead money, you just say to them that interest repayments are the exact same thing. And if they've got a loan in Melbourne or Sydney, their interest repayments are going to be astronomically huge. So you can just say that to them. Another con, no security in renting. There's no getting around that. You can get kicked out any time. The landlord might sell, might move in himself, things like that. So if you've got a cat, dog, pets, kids, whatever, sick parents, somewhere where you need to set up shop and you don't want to be disturbed, maybe this isn't the strategy for you. And third and last, and this is a huge point, rentvesting is only for the disciplined. A mortgage acts as a forced savings mechanism. Someone that takes a mortgage out, let's say someone takes a mortgage out right now, they pay it off in 30 years. Doesn't matter if they're not good with saving money. If you take out a mortgage, the bank is going to remind you very, very well that you need to pay it back. So mortgages are good for people that aren't disciplined, because they have that real, I need to pay it back, or the bank's going to take my house. It's a really good reminder that you need to pay your loan back, which I think is a good thing. If you're rentvesting and you're not disciplined, you're going to have all this extra cash lying around, because renting, by definition, is cheaper than owning a home. If you waste it on clothes, food, smashed avocados on toast, it's not going to work. 30 years is going to go by, and the person that bought the home in Melbourne is going to have it paid off, hopefully. Maybe not, because it's a pretty big loan. And you're going to have nothing, because you've been renting for 30 years and you haven't been investing. It only works if you're disciplined enough to take that surplus of cash and invest it in something, anything, real estate, bonds, whatever. But that's the only way it can work. If you're not disciplined, it's not going to work. It's going to backfire big time. So if you're not a disciplined person, don't worry about this strategy. Just go with the stock standard mortgage and just pay it off. And that's pretty much it, guys. I've been rentvesting now for nearly a year. And, you can follow everything on my site, my blog. It's www.aussiefirebug.com. For me, it's perfect for me and my partner. Like we want to do traveling in the future. We've got no, we've got no roots heavily planted where we are. We got all this extra money that we can throw at our investments. So it works really well for us. And this is I'm from country Victoria. So I crunch the numbers and it still works out to be cheaper to rent in the country than it did to buy, even in the country. And the difference in house prices are way, way, way different. The country versus metro. If I was in Melbourne or Sydney, it wouldn't even be a question about whether or not I'd rent or buy. It would be renting 100% of the time. In the country, it's pretty close. It's really close, and a lot of it, it depends on appreciation of the house and everything like that. But it's a lot closer than the two biggest cities. Like it's a no-brainer, I think. Unless you've got a darn good reason to buy a house, I don't think, I think you'd have to be crazy to buy in those two cities unless you had a really good reason. That's going to be it, guys. I hope you enjoyed my thoughts on the latest article. To read the full article, head over to the website, www.aussiefirebug.com. So I've started a YouTube channel now, so you can see, you can hear my voice and you can see what I'm viewing on my screen. If you're listening on SoundCloud, which I'm also on SoundCloud. So this isn't going to be released as like an official podcast. This is just going to be like an article. And I'm also on iTunes. So please comment on the article or flick us some feedback on the site, or whether or not you liked it. And until next time.